Hi everyone. I talk on my channel about collapse, but what does that actually mean? What precisely is collapsing? Today I want to talk about 7 physical or social systems that are currently either on the precipice of collapse or already in sharp decline, so that you can be better informed about what the world and your life might look like as we head into the next years to decades. This has ended up being quite a long video because there's a lot to delve into for each type of collapse, but I wanted to keep it in one video because of how they're all connected. Scientific discussions especially often get siloed and can be victim to narrow thinking in a way. So I wanted to show how this is not just a list of separate issues, it's all the one issue really. So let's get into it. Financial collapse. The first type of collapse is financial. I put up a video a while back about the recession that will last forever, but didn't go into any detail about why I think the financial system will collapse or how that might happen. I bring this one up first because it is the one that can occur the fastest and possibly the soonest, depending on who you ask. Most modern economies use fiat currency, which is a currency that isn't backed by a physical good like silver or gold. Units of currency are created by central banks and commercial banks through issuing debt. When a bank issues a loan, like for a home mortgage, it creates new money out of thin air. All the new money created in this system started out as debt. To pay back the debt plus interest, the system requires even more money to be created, which leads to more debt. This is inherently unsustainable. It should be pretty clear that it is. It's like a treadmill that always has to be speeding up. Global debt is now more than 3 times the gross world product, or the value of economic output of all the world's economies. So most of the world's money that is moving around is debt. It's money that is used by somebody but owed to somebody else. There is over $300 trillion of debt in the world, and that money is all being used to purchase or invest in products, services, businesses, or is being traded on secondary financial markets like futures and options, which means it is all using energy and natural resources. The more money we have, the more debt we have, and the more the natural world is plundered. At this point, there is simply no physically possible way for all of this debt to be paid off. The natural world is finite, but our economic system relies on unending growth in order to not implode in on itself. As the burden of debt increases and people expect returns on their investments and their retirement funds, economic growth, even more so, is required to support these needs. But exponential growth, around 2 to 3% per year, is just physically incompatible with the fact that our resources are finite. Eventually, either resource scarcity, ecological collapse, or energy constraints will stop our financial system from expanding any further. Even without focusing on nature, we can see that the current financial system is set up much like a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme pays the current members of the scheme by introducing new members and taking their investment money. Our financial system requires continuous new borrowing and increase in population or productivity growth, or both. When growth slows, either because people have fewer babies or productivity stagnates, the maths of this situation stops working. We can't keep bringing in new people. The whole structure collapses without this continued increasing inputs. Now, central banks and governments have some levers to pull to alleviate the systems of a sluggish economy or other macroeconomic problems. But none of what they are able to do is actually any type of solution to the problems with the system I just described. Governments respond to crises like the 2008 recession or COVID-19 by doing a few things. They can lower interest rates to encourage people to take on more debt and therefore spend more money. They can expand government spending to help people meet their needs, or give money to business owners or other rich to trickle down to the rest of us. That doesn't happen in reality. They can increase liquidity in the economy, which means making more money available. They do this through quantitative easing, which just means the government makes money out of thin air instead of the banks making money out of thin air. This prevents immediate collapse, but it doesn't resolve any of the underlying structural imbalances. And it also makes the future problem harder to deal with because there's now more debt, more production, more consumption, and inevitably more money in the hands of the rich. Actions like this cause a few things to happen. Wealth inequality increases, first of all, which has been occurring for decades now, whether in good or bad economic times. It also causes asset bubbles to form, which is where the value of a group of assets like housing gets bigger quite quickly because of all the new money in the system from a certain subset of people or businesses. Zombie companies, for example, that don't provide much real value to the economy are stopped from collapsing because they're able to access cheap debt. You've also got the AI bubble. Everyone's talking about AI right now. I won't go into detail with that, but it's just kicking the can down the road. If there is so much money in the system, yet so many people are struggling to get by, as is happening more and more in recent years, people lose trust in the value of money, as well as in the ability of governments and banks to get us through a crisis. And at the extreme end, the fairness and justice in this, our understanding of fairness and justice in the system as a whole is weakened. When trust in government and the financial system falters, people don't want to invest in new business ventures and they don't want to spend much of their money beyond the necessities. So with all this bubbling under the surface of our financial system, how might it all go down in a way that leads to collapse of the global economy? Would that happen? Yeah, it could. Our economy is very globalized now. So there will likely be a trigger event, something that creates a tear in the fabric that covers these problems. Perhaps a large bank will fail, or a large company will default on their loans, some sort of debt crisis. Perhaps there will be a geopolitical shock like a war or a disruption in energy supply. At the moment, situation with Israel, Iran, the US, China, Taiwan, Russia, it's all pretty dicey. Iran is an interesting one because they control the Strait of Hormuz, and that's where 20% of the world's oil passes through. So they have the ability to shut that off and cause a supply chain issue in that regard. If they did that, it would cause major changes in oil prices as well as difficulty getting oil to where it is needed throughout the world. Or it could be an ecological crisis or a natural disaster, maybe a disaster in an area that, say in Taiwan, where they make 90% of all AI chips, for example. If that went, then that would change the supply chain drastically. Or even a non-natural physical disaster like 9/11, or when that big container ship, the Ever Given, got stuck in the Suez Canal. That had a big impact on businesses as well. So when something really bad happens, banks don't want to lend out as much money and they don't want to take on as much risk. So banks stop lending, businesses can't get their activities financed or refinanced, and the defaults on loans can cascade through the economy, like mortgages, businesses, and even governments, because governments owe money to different businesses as well. We also see asset classes losing value, like how the stock market waves up and down whenever Trump says something out of the ordinary, which seems like it happens every day. Stock markets can crash, real estate prices plummet, and the value of people's retirement funds can drop significantly, like in the recession of 2008. If things go even further, a country's currency can start to break down. So we saw this happen in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, Greece, all in the last 30 years or so. Hyperinflation can occur where the value of that currency is just eroded really, really quickly and by a great amount, or deflation, depending on how the government acts. Governments might lose control altogether over the issuing of money. Even before there are major currency problems, economic slowing or stock market crashes cause mass unemployment. Public services collapse because of government cuts. There can be authoritarian responses like we see in the US at the moment. Lots of people can switch to investing in gold or land or crypto because they're seen as better bets in difficult times. All of these consequences are either shrunk or pushed into the future by government actions, but they can never be completely prevented or avoided forever because of the underlying nature of the system. Collapse may be delayed, but not for long. The question is not if this current growth-based financial system will collapse, but when. Some say it's already happening, and we're not hard pressed to find examples of that all around us. Others say it's months to years away, and others still say it's years to decades. Those who are predicting a more imminent collapse seem to be more focused on debt, on asset bubbles, especially AI at the moment, and geopolitical tensions, whereas those who are predicting a more long-term disintegration of the financial system, I find they're speaking more on ecological and energy decline bases. But we know that it will happen eventually simply because of how the rules are set up. Climate collapse. The next type of collapse I'd like to discuss is climate collapse. This overlaps with some of the other types of collapse, but it is of course an important issue in and of itself. If you're watching this video, you probably understand the basics of climate change, but what we don't often see, even in media from environmentalists, is how the climate system is predicted to collapse. It's not just a matter of some things getting hotter on average, although that is happening, but global warming is causing the climate system to surpass tipping points that mean the Earth's climate system will likely collapse and not get back to the way it was during the stable Holocene period that we've enjoyed up until now. Global temperatures are rising rapidly, and they're not rising in a linear fashion anymore. The warming is accelerating, and these quick changes are causing weather systems to destabilise and are amplifying extremes of heat and cold, wet and dry. Heat waves are becoming more intense and prolonged, and areas which wouldn't normally get heat waves are starting to experience them. The jet stream that keeps weather moving around the northern hemisphere is believed to be slowing due to global warming, and that slowing means that persistent droughts and floods are more likely. We also see that the permafrost is thawing and releasing methane and CO2, which causes further warming, a positive feedback loop that loops in on itself and magnifies. The Arctic is losing its ice, which reveals dark water underneath, thereby reducing the reflectivity of the Earth's surface and accelerating warming even further. Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are melting at non-linear rates as well. They are accelerating, and once they're gone, they're not coming back. Glaciers are shrinking, which threatens water security for communities in those areas and increases the risk of flood there too. Overall, the water cycle is becoming less stable and more erratic. The reason why I call this climate collapse, or sometimes the climate crisis, and not just change or warming, is because of tipping points in the system that have been surpassed or will be surpassed soon. It is because the climate scientists are measuring not just linear changes, but exponential changes, tipping points, feedback loops, and overall destabilization of the system. A climate system that has these features is in collapse. The Earth's climate, as we've known it for the last 10,000 years, is no more. We are simultaneously putting pressure on all parts of Earth's climate system, from the ocean to the glaciers to the atmosphere to the desert and everything in between. The risk of abrupt system-wide collapse is real. And the risk that this system-wide collapse will be abrupt is real. Already the reality of climate change has generally been worse and more extreme than what models predicted. And the things that we know make the biggest impact on climate change, fossil fuels and industrial agriculture, specifically animal agriculture, have trillions of dollars and millions of people working to maintain and expand these activities. Plus, there is already much warming baked into the system. Even if all humans disappeared overnight, the system would still collapse. It is a necessary symptom of a modern industrial civilization which has to run on burning fossil fuels and must continue to grow in order to not implode. Climate collapse has begun, and for the entire lifetime of everyone alive today and their children, it will get worse. I just want you to understand that now. It is impossible to stop it now, no matter what we do on an individual or global level. I don't say this to make you feel despair or sadness. I want you to know the reality of the situation because hardly anyone is talking about this. Accepting and understanding this point is a crucial stepping stone for anyone who wants to know what the future really holds. Ocean systems collapse. One of the systems that is affected by climate change but is also at risk because of other issues is the ocean. While over 2 billion of us live near the coast, the ocean is still a very mysterious and distant entity to many of us. But the regulation of ocean systems is vital for our civilization to continue in some form. Currently, ocean systems that we rely on are starting to fall apart. Excess heat that is trapped in the atmosphere due to greenhouse gases is mostly absorbed by the ocean. It acts as a big buffer of energy, allowing us to be quite comfortable on land, despite a lot of extra energy being stored within Earth's other systems. The ocean is absorbing most excess heat, and that leads to marine heat waves. These can be catastrophic on a local and regional level, and they can happen quite abruptly. While the ocean does change in temperature throughout the seasons, when global warming, natural disasters, and other factors combine, they can cause heat waves that mean devastation for marine plant and animal populations. The Guardian says, WMO scientists said the record heat on land and in the ocean was mostly driven by the climate crisis and coincided with a string of extreme weather events, from deadly landslides in the Philippines to floods in Australia and rapid glacier loss in Indonesia. Warming of the ocean also causes coral reefs to die off, and huge areas of corals have been bleached and are struggling to return to normal. It is predicted that 90% of all coral reefs could disappear by 2050, which, if you're keeping track, is, as of a couple of months ago, closer than the year 2000. Do with that what you will. Another quote from The Guardian I read, coral reefs are damaged due to an accumulation of threats resulting from human activities. Overfishing, pollution, and coastal development are at the top of the list of chronic stresses. Others are dredged or sandblasted for their limestone or to improve access and navigational safety. On top of that, you may have seen the recent news, which was that a tipping point has been reached for a lot of coral reef systems where they are now past the point of being able to ever recover. So that is tipping point 7 of 9 that we have now surpassed, that ecological scientists have been measuring for a while now. One problem with the ocean system that I'm seeing a lot of recently as well is the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. This is a system of warm and cool water that flows up and down the Atlantic at different depths, carrying warm water from the equator up to the northern hemisphere, releasing that heat into the atmosphere, and then sinking to the bottom as cooler, saltier water before then heading southwards back to the equator. This takes a long time for this water to circulate around, but we see evidence now that the currents are starting to slow down, and it is because of global warming. As sea ice melts, there's more fresh water melting into the ocean, and that changes how the water sinks and floats, and it slows down the movement of the water. Increased overall temperature of the ocean water also slows down this sinking and moving of water. There is a chance that the entire thing could stop working completely by the end of the century. Newer research is bringing up that predicted collapse could happen as early as the late 2030s. MIT tells us that even a slight slowdown in the AMOC can cool Europe, change precipitation patterns in parts of Europe, South America, and Africa, affect the timing of the Indian monsoon and lead the tropical rain belt to shift southward, resulting in droughts over the African Sahel. Well, if the AMOC collapses, it is considered a tipping point, like I discussed with the coral reefs just before. So rather than a linear change, the whole system switches over into a new state, and the impacts are basically impossible to reverse. Heat and the AMOC slowing are two massive parts of the ocean system that threatens collapse. But wait, there's more. With more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more gets absorbed into the ocean as well, which we know. Mix water with carbon dioxide and some of that will turn into carbonic acid, H2CO3, and that results in ocean acidification. Marine ecosystems, particularly those with organisms that rely on calcium carbonate for things like shells and skeletons, are affected by ocean acidification because they can't get the nutrients they need to build their little bodies. As well as acidity rising, oxygen levels are decreasing. Warmer water holds less oxygen, and pollution from nutrients like agricultural runoff causes dead zones, conditions where marine life can't be sustained. Other currents apart from the AMOC are also affected by changes in temperature and salinity from melting ice, and shifts in currents can be triggered abruptly and with little warning. And the conditions in and on the ocean change weather on land as well. Losing ice over the ocean alters how much heat is exchanged between the ocean and the air, which destabilizes weather and accelerates other feedback loops. This increases the risk of tipping points being passed and weather patterns shifting into something irreversible that we've never seen before. These systems are all connected, and there's a decent chance of tipping cascades, which means one part of the system collapses or hits a tipping point, which creates a feedback loop affecting another part, and the overall stability of the whole ocean system is threatened. Lastly, the ocean provides sustenance to billions of people. 2% of overall calorie intake and 15% of protein intake comes from our oceans. But most ocean fisheries are overfished or maximally fished. We kill 2 trillion marine animals every year. That number is it's just bonkers. I can't even imagine what 2 trillion is. We kill 2 trillion marine animals every year for food, for livestock feed, and other uses. Overfishing and ecosystem destruction from fishing techniques like bottom trawlers, where they just get a huge net and just scrape the bottom of the ocean, understandably causes devastation to aquatic populations. But marine populations are not the only populations to be severely affected by human actions, which leads me to the next type of collapse: biodiversity collapse. Biodiversity refers to the quantity and variety of plants, animals, fungi, and other life that inhabit an ecosystem. Earth's biodiversity has been plummeting since the Industrial Revolution, and especially since the 1970s, when it is generally agreed that we overshot our carrying capacity as a species. In Australia, we have a Threatened Species Index, which measures the abundance of plants and animals in Australia. Looking at threatened and near-threatened species, just from 1985 to 2020, plant species declined in abundance by about 70%, bird species declined by about 60%, and mammal species declined by 50%. This is just in the last 40 years. Now, there are species which are thriving, of course, but these statistics show how the most vulnerable and threatened of our plant and animal brethren are getting absolutely hammered. One statistic that I've shared before, and I think is mind-blowing, is that 96% of the mass of the world's mammals are humans and our livestock. Just 4% are wild mammals. And 70% of the world's birds are poultry for human use. Humans now outweigh wild mammals by 10 times. And we breed and kill 100 billion mammals and birds every year for our own desires. There is basically no area on Earth that doesn't have its biodiversity affected by human activity. But what are we doing that is actually causing this loss? Habitat destruction is a big one. Deforestation, urban expansion, and infrastructure development have eliminated natural habitats or fragmented them to the point where populations cannot thrive. As well as destroying habitat, we release our waste and pollution into natural environments. Industrial, agricultural, and plastic pollution has degraded ecosystems and poisoned countless species. The species we use for our own desires are either extinct, threatened, or overexploited in some other way. Overfishing is a big one that I addressed earlier. Hunting is also a big one. Here in my state of Victoria, we still have the abomination that is the duck shooting season, supported by the government, despite independent analyses recommending that it be shut down. It is legal here to shoot native wild ducks in certain areas during duck season. It's illegal to shoot threatened species, but every duck shooting season there are thousands of killed and injured birds of threatened and endangered species left in the environment, as well as taken home to be eaten. Marine animals are used for research, illegal wildlife trade, and alternative medicine. This is one place where veganism is particularly good for the environment because we're doing our best just to leave the animals the heck alone. In veganism, it is because we believe it is their right to live more than our right to use their bodies for our own desires, but it also helps to protect biodiversity. Biodiversity is also diminishing because of human-introduced invasive species. We introduce non-native species that prey upon native species, both plant and animal, or they outcompete them for food or habitat, or they bring disease. Australia has really strong biosecurity laws now to prevent disease or damaging plants and animals coming to the country, but we still have a lot of invasive species. And it sucks because now we're in this situation of having wild brumbies damaging soil in national forests, we have rabbits digging up paddocks, we have cane toads everywhere in Queensland. None of it is their fault, they're just living their lives. And now we have humans going out and killing a bunch of innocent animals in the name of returning an area to some sort of equilibrium, while we as humans continue killing native animals, farmed animals, poisoning plants and insects for our food, and flat out destroying forests and other habitats through our ever-growing society. It's a lose-lose for wildlife, native or non-native at this point, because of human activity. You may have seen the popular video about wolves in Yellowstone National Park. They were driven out a long time ago, and a documentary showed how reintroducing just a small number of wolves into an area they used to live in had benefits for the entire ecosystem. It turns out when the wolves were killed back in the 1920s in an effort to, quote, tame the wilderness, it had flow-on effects for the entire area. Without wolves to eat them, the elk population increased. They ate all the food they normally ate, but then also started eating other species of trees and plants to survive, which meant that there were less of those trees that beavers needed to build their habitat. With fewer beavers, plus the plants down the edges of the rivers being eaten by the elk, the flow of the rivers changed and the water didn't stay in the environment for as long. It didn't meander and flow slowly through the beaver dams and around solid riverbanks with lots of plants. They reintroduced wolves into the area and the elk population decreased, the beaver population increased, the river biodiversity increased, the willows and other trees were doing better because the presence of the wolves kept the elk on the move, so they weren't able to strip all the trees in one go. It's amazing to learn about. Wolves are what we call a keystone species, which means their presence has a tremendous cascading effect on the rest of the species in the area. Sometimes we don't know that a species is so important to an ecosystem until it's gone. And this sort of trophic cascade, where the flows of energy between species is all messed up, is happening all around the world for a range of reasons, but a lot of which are humans. Now, I've seen it written that humans are a keystone species, and I would happen to agree, but maybe not in a positive way, but definitely in the way that humans can basically affect other species both deliberately and accidentally by the way we are behaving and growing in the ecosystems that we're in. Insects are another massive one we need to talk about. Insect biodiversity and its effects on the wider world and on human society is what's getting me most worried about our ability to continue on as a civilization in terms of biodiversity. You may have heard the quote that if all the bees disappeared, humans would all be dead in 3 years because we rely on insect pollination for so many of our food crops. But beyond pollination, insect biodiversity loss is well and truly underway. It is trundling along at an alarming speed and it is accelerating in many areas. Insects are diminishing in population by 2.5% on average over the last 25 years, every year that is. This is an absolutely bonkers statistic because it means that if that rate continues, all insects will basically be gone in the next century. Hardly anyone's talking about this either. But you could say the same for the other issues I've raised in this video. That's why I'm here yammering on about it all. There are pockets of the world where that collapse of insect population has already occurred, like in Puerto Rico, where a scientist returned to some research sites after 35 years to find the populations had decreased by 98%. This is not a blip or something that has been a problem in the past, but we're fixing it now, like the hole in the ozone layer. This is a problem that has been occurring for decades, is worsening, is accelerating, and governments and organisations are doing very, very little to stop it. Intensive agriculture, and particularly pesticides, are the main cause of biodiversity collapse in insects. Invasive species and climate change are also affecting insect populations. Farmed honeybees, for example, are outcompeting native bees and other insects for food. Increased temperatures and changes in humidity means that insect populations are shifting, both in time and space, and then the breeding of insects doesn't line up as well with bird breeding, for example. So we end up with too many of one insect species because they're not getting eaten by the birds, which then outcompetes another species, or in terms of temperature, they may just not be able to cope with the changes. When researching this topic, I was delighted to find an idea that was completely new to me called exergy. There may be an object or a substance that contains matter or energy, but how much useful or practical work can be done with that substance is the exergy. It's normally used in engineering, but it's starting to be used in ecology, with the term eco-exergy being coined by Sven Jorgensen. It's how we can understand not just the energy stored inside an animal or plant or other structure, but also the informational capacity stored in its genome, the information and chemical energy stored in a species or an individual. Biodiversity loss causes lost exergy because once a species is extinct, not only is the energy they contained dissipated or lost into the environment, but also the information that was stored in their DNA, how they fit into the ecosystem, their abilities and capacities is lost as well. Scientists believe that the information lost because of what humans have done well and truly exceeds the information that we have gained from developing modern society. Just like burning down a library destroys knowledge, burning down the forests and warming the oceans destroys genetic and ecological information. I don't think I need to go into great detail about why biodiversity loss is a problem for humans if we're thinking about ourselves. But in a nutshell, we rely on ecosystems working properly to provide us with clean air, clean water, fertile soil for food, and plants for shelter, clothing, and medicine. All of those things that are vital to human survival are threatened by biodiversity collapse. Our very existence is threatened by it. I don't know how to finish this section of the video. Shit's fucked, mate. The planet's dying, now we have to deal with it. Okay, but wait, there's more. The next type of collapse I want to talk about is the collapse of supply chains. So I'm sure you're aware, supply chains are systems that move goods from the people who extract, mine, grow, manufacture products to the people who consume them. What I think will occur to global supply chains in the next years to decades will be a collapse of those systems by most definitions. While we have temporary disruptions at times, I think we're starting to see the start of a collapse, a severe disruption that is systemic, prolonged, and cascades through different stages of the supply chain, as well as different geographical areas. Let's look at why a supply chain or part of a supply chain might collapse or be disrupted or have some difficulties in general. Energy decline is a good one. If fuel or electricity prices increase, that makes the cost of everything go up because at every stage of the supply chain requires energy, whether that's the actual making of the thing or transporting it around the world. Conflict is another reason why supply chains might be disrupted. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has stuffed up supplies getting in and out of Ukraine. Israel's outright stopping food from getting into Gaza, which is still a supply chain issue because everyone in a supply chain has to be willing to move the goods and services along the chain in order for the end user to receive it. Natural disasters and climate-related problems affect transport routes, storms disrupt production or crop harvests, and floods drown livestock. Economic crashes or interest rate changes can interrupt how businesses operate and how they fund their activities as well, which I discussed earlier in the financial collapse part. We saw in 2020 how a pandemic can interrupt supply chains too. Without people going to work to make the stuff doesn't get made. Changes to how the work has to be done to keep people apart and keep them safe slowed down production of many important supplies. Labour shortages in general have several common causes like union tensions or layoffs. Increased demand of certain items like masks and vaccines mean businesses have to make big changes to their production capacity and how they're structuring things. Speaking of economic structuring, we have a large reliance on globalisation in our modern industrial economy. We have a heavy reliance on producers of all sorts of minerals and materials in distant lands, with some places dominating the supply of some of our most widely used products. Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana in Africa supply 60% of the world's cocoa, for example. Madagascar supplies 80% of the world's vanilla. Most of the world's graphite comes from China. In fact, 65% of mined rare earths come from China, and they control 90% of the processing capacity. This is great for some people who have the money to access products made from these materials and ingredients, and for those making money from these businesses. But it means that when something goes wrong, there is little resilience in the supply chain. I run a shop and the cost of my chocolate products are just going up and up, almost double what they were 2 years ago, because of the issues over the last couple of years in cocoa producing countries like disease, bad weather, and illegal mining destroying farms. On the flip side, some governments are taking action to reshore production, which means making more of the products that are consumed in that country instead of importing them. This is a good idea, but it has its downsides. For example, tariffs on US imports have been implemented without any real plans for increasing manufacturing capacity or training the required labour. So at least in the short to medium term, there's going to be less stuff going into the country and it's going to be more expensive. Even with a good plan for reshoring production, there's still going to be disruptions to the market as supply and demand and prices all work themselves out. Then you've got other risks like cyber attacks, or like that big ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal for a couple of weeks. Terrorist attacks or other nefarious activities are all risks as well. Overlaying all of this is that many businesses, especially manufacturing and production-based businesses, run on a just-in-time system where they try to reduce the time goods spend waiting in a warehouse and try to not have any leftovers because they optimize for profit. It makes operations very efficient when everything is working smoothly, but the system is fragile. With no redundancies in place, when something goes wrong, the negative effects ripple through the supply chain instead of being buffered by any backups or flexibility in production capacity. So we can ask ourselves, what are the odds that all those aspects of our global supply chains are going to work fine for the foreseeable future? And we can think, as we look forward to the future as well, are governments and businesses doing enough or doing anything substantial to prevent these problems from happening again or happening worse? Are these potential causes of collapse getting more likely at the moment? Unfortunately, it's not looking good on many measures. Climate change related disasters are getting worse and will continue to do so on an accelerating basis. This is one cause of supply chain issues. Many major political tensions are not showing any signs of resolving anytime soon. Wealth inequality is increasing. Businesses are being absorbed by other businesses, so there is less variety in the types of operations that are delivering goods and services. And governments are generally not keeping up with levelling the playing field for the average person. So as larger and larger corporations continue to dominate the market, I don't see the just-in-time mentality being replaced by a mindset of preparedness, fairness, and resilience in any big businesses. The boom and bust cycle of economic governance is showing no signs of changing in my country, that's for sure. Cyber attacks are getting more common, and with more digital tech and AI tech coming out all the time, that increases the chances of attacks, in my opinion. So with this brief knowledge of all the different things that could happen in a supply chain, what are the effects on people and planet when things go wrong? And what can we expect the effects to be as these causes and conditions we've just discussed continue to worsen? The first thing that most people notice when there's a supply chain issue is rising prices. In a developed economy like Australia, there's usually enough wiggle room in the supply that a change in price is going to decrease the demand enough to get back to some sort of equilibrium. But there is no real limit to this. There's no reason why prices wouldn't continue to increase, perhaps leading to hyperinflation in some cases, as long as supply problems continue. Prices have been increasing in Australia for things like building materials, for example, which affects not just people building a house, but anyone wanting to increase manufacturing capacity or upgrade their existing infrastructure. What we've also seen in Australia with supply chain issues is job losses. Last year there was a tomato virus outbreak, and that caused hundreds of jobs to be lost, as well as prices to rise in this particular industry. Jobs in construction and manufacturing are also lost when materials are more expensive. The pandemic caused many jobs to be lost as people weren't accessing some types of goods and services during lockdowns. Economic sectors that are reliant on international trade are harder hit by this issue too. When necessities like food and medicine become scarce, civil unrest can result if it gets bad enough. This risk is a focus of a lot of the prepper literature that I see, where people are encouraged to prepare for empty supermarket shelves. Panic buying and hoarding might take place if the shelves do indeed become empty. Trust in government and each other decreases as well, which causes a whole host of other issues. And if you go to the worst case scenario, famine and malnutrition can result. Estimates that combine the factors of population growth, agricultural yield, climate change, and political instability predict increases in famine in the coming decades across the globe, not just places that we would normally consider to be unstable, have food instability. Supply chain problems have an interesting effect on the environment. On the one hand, damage to the planet can increase when economies suffer supply chain issues, because when natural resources are scarce, people may push further into the wilderness to continue production. People dig deeper in mines in order to find more minerals. Governments may reduce environmental regulations to allow corporations to access more forests or do that deeper digging. If a company doesn't have a buyer for their waste products or are struggling to stay profitable while paying their recycling bill, then protecting the environment is often something that is done away with first. On the other hand, supply chain issues can cause a decrease in economic activity instead of an increase in some areas, like during the pandemic, which means better conditions for the rest of the species on the planet. Pollution and environmental destruction decreased during COVID-19 because we were producing and consuming less overall. So our global supply chain was never built to be sustainable or resilient. It was built by groups of people wanting to provide goods and services to other people, usually in the most profitable way. It was built on the assumption of continued economic growth, as is the rest of our financial system, and continued and increasing access to fossil fuels and minerals was expected as well. And the result is a system that is unequal, it is fragile, and it's one that cannot physically continue in its current form for much longer. Food systems collapse. While we're thinking about supply chains, one category of products that's always being affected by our supply chain issues is our food. Our food system is about 10% of the world's economic activity. It employs over a third of all humans, and it's responsible for a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, it's a necessary system to have. The causes and effects of food system problems are much the same as the supply chain issues I described before. Except the food system is even more inextricably linked with the environment, with natural resources, with health and well-being, and with whether or not we have humans on the planet at all. The global food system is currently built on industrial agriculture. It is built on intensive monoculture farming, long supply chains, and heavy reliance on fossil fuels for production, transportation, and processing. This is in what we'd call the developed world, or the minority world anyway. Small farms do provide for about half of all food production in the world. They're not the sort of farms and food system types that are causing most of the issues that agriculture and our food system causes to the planet. However, they are still going to be victims of the effects of food system collapse. We also use the bulk of our agricultural land for livestock, whether that's pasture or feed crops, which is generally a highly inefficient way of getting food to people. This system that we have is increasingly unsustainable due to several big factors. First one is soil degradation. Topsoil, which is the soil that contains all the bugs and the nutrients and can hold the air and water required to grow good food, is being removed from most farmland, either by being washed away, blown away, or being tilled or overgrazed. Topsoil gets moved around and increases and decreases naturally, but human activity has increased topsoil degradation by about 1,000 times the natural rate. Soil is a finite resource at this point, which seems a bit odd, but basically at a human timescale, we are destroying it much, much faster than it's getting replenished. It's predicted that topsoil will be 95% gone by 2050, which again, reminder, is only 25 years away. It's not decades and decades into the future. And this will decrease crop yields by up to 50%. It'll also increase erosion and reduce water retention in the soil, which both cause downstream effects as well. Agriculture also affects biodiversity and is affected by biodiversity. We've discussed the collapse of biodiversity and how much of a threat it is. Our food system relies on pollinators, on clean water, on good soil, and all of that requires biodiversity in order to work properly. Our agricultural activities paradoxically make those factors worse because our farmland is made by destroying natural habitats. We've also talked about climate change, but that specifically relates to agriculture and our food system because of heat stress on plants, changes to seasons affecting the timing of natural cycles, and damage to crops from floods, droughts, and storms. Fertilizers and pesticides are used all over the world, and they also cause harm to the surrounding environment. Pesticides reduce biodiversity, as they're literally designed to kill plants, animals, and fungi, and fertilizer runoff causes algal blooms and ocean dead zones, like I mentioned before. Agriculture is an industry that is being hammered by climate change and other environmental problems, and predictions suggest it is going to get a lot worse. The collapse of the food system has already begun to manifest in several ways. Extreme weather events such as droughts, floods, and heat waves have disrupted food production in key regions, causing crop failures and supply shortages. We are also seeing a rise in food prices. Inflation and food insecurity go hand in hand, especially in low-income countries. So things are definitely getting tougher for our food systems. But why would we believe that an actual collapse, is either occurring or will likely occur? The reasoning comes down to the way our food system relies on so many other parts of our world and economy to be going right in order to work properly. The only reason we can feed 8 billion people now is because of the Green Revolution in the 1960s, where synthetic fertilizers, among other technologies, were developed. We now rely on synthetic fertilizers to grow almost half the world's food. These fertilizers require natural gas or coal to create them. So any problems with the supply of these fossil fuels or the availability of these fuels affects how much food we can grow. Our food system relies on a stable climate as well, which is disappearing fast. And It also relies on political and international stability because most countries have lots of food exported and imported. Right now we see people starving not because of a food shortage overall, but because of decisions by politicians. The ability for farmers to stay on their land and grow food relies on government regulations being favourable to them. Many subsistence farmers are being pushed off their land by big corporations or by civil unrest. So what happens when communities start to run out of food? It's already happening in some places. There are 24 countries marked by the Food and Agriculture Organization as hunger hotspots. Closer to home, I'm not sure how people in my community would react if the supermarket shelves started to empty. The saying goes that there are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. Perhaps there's some truth to that. I tried to find out how many days worth of food the average Aussie household has stored, and I couldn't find an exact answer, but it's something I'm interested in. New South Wales Health said up to 14 days stored, but with some caveats. I did learn that 3.7 million Australian households had some level of food insecurity in the past year. That is nuts for such a rich country, and we're going to be better off than most. In areas where subsistence farming is common, households are looking at their food stores and planning for whether it will last until the next harvest. In places like Australia, where very few people grow their own food, we often only think about how much food we have before we can pop to the supermarket. Food insecurity at the household level is one thing, but supermarkets usually only have 2 to 3 days of many items on hand at any time. As far as I see it, collapse of the global food system is inevitable. The trajectory as it currently stands points towards a chaotic climate, scarce fossil fuels, power being given to corporations more and more, topsoil loss continuing or increasing, fertiliser runoff increasing, the list goes on. And although there are pockets of people doing fantastic things to turn this ship around, I don't see any evidence of the system as a whole that supports 8 billion people to not starve, changing in any substantial way that would prevent collapse. You might disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm generally an optimistic person, but when I look at where we're headed and what has been done historically and up to now to address the predicament we're in, I'm not left with much hope of a brighter future. There is collapse of the food system and famine coming. There's really not much evidence pointing in the other direction. And it's a really, really tragic point that we are at right now. Mental health collapse. All of this doom and gloom is going to have an effect on our minds when we learn about it or experience these issues firsthand. And that's what brings me to the 6th type of collapse I'm discussing today, which is mental health. Globally, indicators of mental health point to a decline over the last few years. There's been a significant rise in mental health issues like anxiety and depression, and younger generations are notable in experiencing a higher decline in this mental health, especially when we're looking at their views on the future. Now, we know that economic challenges impact mental health. Financial instability and food insecurity is a huge cause of stress. Losing a job or facing homelessness messes with our minds. People who are aware of global problems are more likely to be depressed. If you're doing your best to not participate in a massively destructive problem that is happening all around you, it gets depressing. And it's exacerbated if you feel like you don't have control over your life and the impact that you have. A specific type of this mental health problem is called eco-anxiety. People are generally worried about climate change. They report feeling sad, anxious, powerless, and guilty. Nearly half of respondents of one study said their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. Most people believe that the future is frightening and that we have failed to take care of the planet. They feel betrayed by their governments. On top of this, we have some evidence that air, soil, and water quality can directly impact mental health. If we can't access green spaces, or we live in an area with lots of air pollution, we can't handle the stresses of daily life as well as those with clean air and access to nature. Overall quality of life indicators are declining for many populations as well. The HDI, Human Development Index, which measures life expectancy, education, and standard of living, started to decrease in 2019, and it hasn't yet bounced back up to the previous trajectory. This has happened in every area of the globe, whether poor or rich or in the middle. Then the most recent Human Development Report, where they discuss the Human Development Index, that was released this year, and the focus of that report was how people can work with AI into the future. It was really interesting when I was, looking to find the most recent report, and it was disappointing to see, because we already know that AI is bad for mental health, it's bad for natural resources, power inequality, ecosystems, and general well-being. So it sucked that they took that information about standards of living and well-being, and basically seemed to put it into a report where we were like, let's jump on board the AI train. Whether you're rich or poor, you too can get onto AI. I don't know. It seemed like a weird thing, but the data is there. Our mental health and quality of life are continuing to decline. Mental health is obviously a part of our overall healthcare system as well. So when access to healthcare in general declines, either due to lack of funding or political decisions, lack of educated practitioners or supply shortages, that affects mental health care as well. As a layer on top of that, not being able to access physical healthcare affects our mental health. We need mental health care to fix the fact that we're not getting adequate physical health care. We're more aware than ever of the importance of mental health and well-being for our overall lives, yet the core issues that we face are to the detriment of our mental health. We're more and more aware of all the ways that we are not doing well, and I don't know if that helps us or hinders us. Maybe both. Our lives are increasingly urbanised, indoors, plastic-filled, screen-facing and AI communicating, and the world is increasingly deforested, polluted and deadened. We are more connected in some ways, but lonelier in others. The collapse that has begun is unique because we're viewing it on our phones from across the globe. To me, that just makes it seem more messed up. I don't know, what do you think? Population collapse. The last type of collapse stems from the other types of collapse that I've already described, but it is also a beast in and of itself, and that is population. The topic of how many humans are here at all. I won't go into too much detail today because I would like to discuss population at more length in another video, but there are some main points that I would like to get across right now. I see two trains of thought when people discuss the issue of population. Some say that we are overpopulated, we are growing too fast, and that there aren't enough resources for everyone. Paul Ehrlich wrote the famous book, The Population Bomb, in 1968, which used the newest data to predict that the human population would outstrip agricultural production, and that would lead to famine and population collapse. It was similar to the earlier predictions by Malthus. Now, he didn't predict the Green Revolution, which I mentioned, in the 60s, and that increased food production using fossil fuels and synthetic fertilizers. But the core of what Ehrlich was saying is that the great increase in human population, which has further dramatically increased since he wrote the book, is causing massive problems, can't go on forever, and will likely result in much suffering and starvation. And he's not the only one warning the world of the dangers of overpopulation. Other scientists have been publishing studies for decades on how too many humans will cause problems, just like too many of any other species. The Earth and each ecosystem within it has a carrying capacity of each species that lives there, which is the level at which that species can live there sustainably, indefinitely. All but the very poorest of nations are living at levels above our carrying capacity. The other train of thought that some people have is that they're worried about the population decreasing. People like Musk, Trump, and politicians and economists in many countries are talking about how we need more babies and that we don't want the population to flatten or decrease. They describe the effects of a population stagnation or drop on the economy. They say we need more people to fill up the workforce, to pay off the debts that our society currently has, and to pay taxes so those who are retiring soon can continue to get their pensions. Our economy will collapse if we don't have continued economic growth, and economic growth requires a growth in population, in workers and taxpayers. I generally see people on one side of the issue or the other, but I think both are true at the same time. The increase in human population over the last 200 years has caused tremendous damage to the earth, and it threatens our survival as a species. And a decreasing population would cause our economy to collapse. However, I don't think that's an argument for making more babies. I think it's an argument for overhauling the system that relies on unending growth of population and economy in order to not fall in a heap. People on both sides of the issue have agreed that the current economic and political system is incompatible with a steady or decreasing population. But then they differ in what is to be done about it. Some people think we should push for further population growth, and others push for changing the system to allow for a smaller and eventually small and steady human population. The tragic thing that seems more and more likely to me is that neither of these things will occur. Population growth will stagnate because of a range of factors and start to collapse, but not through careful planning. And all the way down, there will be politicians trying to get people to make more kids while life is more and more difficult for most people. It's part of what makes our current situation a predicament. If there was a solution that made everything better at once, we probably would have done it by now. Population collapse has started occurring in some parts of the world, like Japan and Italy, where the birth rate is below the replacement level. The global human population does continue to rise though, although many countries are experiencing this demographic shift where the birth rate isn't keeping up with the aging population and the population starts to decline. When populations decline, it can put pressure on the healthcare system, the aged care system, the welfare system, areas of innovation and culture, because there are more people pushed into taking care of the retired or dependent groups of people. It's a complex situation. There are upsides to population collapse, for the biosphere anyway. There are basically no environmental problems that are made easier with more people. The fewer people there are, the less demand there is on energy, land and water. There will be less pollution and waste, less deforestation and habitat destruction, a shrinking human footprint, whether that comes from a decrease in consumption or population, or a combination of the two, will provide some respite for the planet's ecosystems, although not before we continue to kick the can down the road and make as much money and cause as much damage as possible on the way down. How they're connected. As I was putting together this video, I tried to divide up these systems into a list of 7 logical categories that were somewhat separate. If you've reached this stage of the video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. It was a long one today. I had a lot to say. You may have noticed that all of these systems that are currently all predicted to collapse are inherently intertwined and interconnected. Each system influences and amplifies the others. They don't exist in isolation. And that's one worrying part about where we're at now as a civilization, because these collapses do not exist in isolation. They won't happen one at a time where we can deal with one problem and then the next. A failure in one area of society or a supply chain can cause flow-on effects to another part of the system. Difficulties in one area make it harder to address challenges in others because we have limited resources to tackle these problems. And when we're taking action to respond to one of these crises, the interconnected nature of the situation means that if we don't consider its impacts on the broader system, not only will we fail to solve the problem in front of us, but we will likely worsen the overall collapse. So what does this mean for you and your life? What kind of effects might these collapses have on you and I? I can't answer that for you because it's different for everyone. How you experience the effects that that the transformation of these systems causes comes down to a huge range of factors. Where do you live? What is the current climate of your area? What is your elevation? What natural disasters are most likely? How much money do you have? Do you have a strong relationship with your neighbours? How old are you? Do you have a disability? What is your ethnicity? What is your education level? What sort of government are you currently living under? All of these affect not only what sort of difficulties are more likely to arise in your area, but also how well suited you are to respond to them. Perhaps a better question to be asked is, what can we as individuals do about this? Actually, that's probably not that much better of a question, because on a worldwide scale, absolutely nothing. There is nothing that you or I can do, any one individual or community could do to stop the trajectory of ecological overshoot of modern industrial civilization. I just wanted to get that out there now. So we need to be mentally and physically prepared for the fact that no matter what you or I do, certain things will occur. The collapse of these systems is likely to occur, probably one after the other, intertwined, or all at once over time. It is in your best interest to be able to accept that sooner rather than later. Easier said than done, so that we can make it less bad for ourselves and for those around us. There are also lots of things that we can do to reduce our contribution to ecological overshoot, and we can stay sane by holding on to the understanding that what we do won't stop the crises, just help us be good people and help relieve suffering on the way down. I have some other videos and plan to have more in the future with more practical information on responses to what I've described in the video today, so watch out for them. Whether the collapse of modern industrial civilization happens stepwise over several centuries, or whether it happens slowly, then faster, then all at once, is yet to be seen. But I can't sit back and live as if none of the problems that I have talked about in this video are going to affect me and my loved ones, which is why I make these videos, so that you can be more informed and hopefully make decisions from a more educated viewpoint, and then make decisions that are better for you and your community. So they're the 7 types of collapse and how they are connected. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks again if you've made it all the way to the end. Like I said, long video today. Be safe and well, and I'll see you next time.